Have you ever wondered who God was before the creation of the world? Is there an origin for the divine, or has it always existed? What unimaginable secrets and truths lie behind the mystery of God before everything we know? In this video, we'll explore the deepest and most surprising ideas about the origin of God, unraveling myths, philosophies, and revelations that challenge our understanding. Get ready for a journey that questions everything you thought you knew about the beginning of divinity and creation. Have you ever wondered how it's possible that God has no origin? That He simply has always existed with no beginning or end? This idea may seem strange because everything we know has a beginning. But in classical theistic traditions, God is conceived precisely as an eternal being, beyond time and space, without cause or generation. Now, we'll see how God and His relationship to creation have been traditionally understood across the main monotheistic religions, and how this explains the mystery of His origin. In Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, God is viewed as the absolute creator of the universe, an omnipotent, omniscient, and eternal being who exists outside of time. This means God was neither created nor emerged from anything else. He simply is, without beginning or end. This divine eternity implies that God is unchanging and not subject to the temporal becoming that characterizes the material world. Therefore, the question of who God was before creation may seem paradoxical. Before time, there is no before, because time itself was created by God. In other words, God is the first cause who gave origin to time and space, and therefore He has no before or after. This conception is based on the philosophical idea of a necessary being, an entity whose existence depends on nothing else, and is the source of all contingent reality. Unlike created things, which depend on other causes or conditions to exist, God exists by Himself and cannot not exist. This foundation is present in the teachings of Augustine and Thomas Aquinas, who argued that God is the pure act of being, without potentiality or change. On the other hand, many religions also employ metaphors and symbols to explain this mystery. In the Bible, for example, it is said that God is the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end, a poetic way of expressing His eternity and presence across all time. In Islam, God is Al-Awwal and Al-Akhir, the first and the last, concepts that reflect the same. In summary, the classical theistic tradition holds that God has no origin because He is eternal and outside time, the first cause that makes the existence of everything created possible. This concept challenges our everyday understanding, but it is fundamental to how God is perceived in many religions, and to how the enigma of divine origin is faced without contradiction. Is it possible to think of an origin for God? Or is it a concept that defies any human logic? Throughout history, many philosophers and thinkers have tried to answer this question and developed theories attempting to explain divine nature and its relationship with the origin of the universe. Below, we'll explore some of the most influential philosophical ideas about God's origin, how divine eternity has been understood, and which paradoxes arise when trying to conceive a beginning for a supreme being. Since antiquity, philosophers like Plato and Aristotle addressed the question of being and the origin of the cosmos with a rational approach seeking to go beyond mythical and religious narratives. Plato proposed the existence of a supreme good, or idea of the good, that stands beyond all that is created and constitutes the ultimate cause of reality and order in the cosmos. This good is eternal and immutable, a perfect form with no origin, because it exists in a realm distinct from the sensible temporal world. For Plato, God or the divine principle needs no origin, because he is the eternal source of all existence and perfection. Aristotle, meanwhile, developed the notion of the prime mover, an unmoved mover, who causes movement and change in the universe without being moved by anything else. This prime mover is pure act, without potentiality, eternal and immutable, and his existence is necessary to explain why there is something rather than nothing. Aristotle considered that this being has no origin or cause, because introducing a prior cause would lead to an infinite regress with no explanation. Thus, the prime mover represents the idea of a God existing outside the causal chain and serving as the ultimate foundation of everything. These ideas were foundational for medieval philosophy, especially for thinkers like Thomas Aquinas, who integrated Aristotelian philosophy with Christian theology. Aquinas developed 5 ways to demonstrate God's existence, including the argument from necessary being and the unmoved mover, which hold that an eternal being must exist to explain the contingent universe. According to him, God has no origin because he is the very foundation of being, the first cause who depends on nothing else to exist. However, attempting to conceive the origin of God poses paradoxes and logical challenges. If God is eternal and has no beginning, how can we understand the idea of before creation? What does it mean to speak of an origin for a being who transcends time? These questions have led philosophers to reflect on the nature of time and existence. Some maintain that time began with creation, so there is no meaning to speak of before God. Others contend that God exists outside time, in an atemporal state beyond our comprehension. Moreover, the idea of a being without origin breaks with our human intuition, which is accustomed to thinking in terms of causes and effects within a linear temporal framework. This generates tension between faith and reason, since human reason struggles to accept something that simply is without prior explanation. Therefore, many philosophers have pointed out that the origin of God is a mystery that perhaps can never be fully understood, but is essential to uphold the idea of an ordered and meaningful universe. In summary, ancient and medieval philosophies have presented God as an eternal, immutable, and necessary being who has no origin because he is the first cause of everything. This conception seeks to avoid infinite regressions and logical paradoxes, but also opens space for mystery and reflection on the limits of human knowledge. Understanding God as a principle without origin invites us to accept that there are realities beyond common logic, and that the search for answers can be as important as the answers themselves. Is it possible to understand how something as absolute as God can have an origin or be subject to paradoxes? The idea of an eternal God without beginning poses dilemmas that have puzzled philosophers, theologians, and thinkers for millennia. Now, we'll analyze the mysteries and paradoxes that arise when attempting to comprehend God's origin, and how those tensions have influenced philosophical and spiritual reflection. One of the most evident paradoxes involves time. If God is eternal and created time itself, how can we speak of before God or his origin? In our daily experience, time is linear and measured by causes and effects, with each event having a beginning and an end. However, If God exists outside time, the concept of before makes no sense. This means we cannot apply human temporal categories to a reality that transcends them. Trying to do so leads to confusion and contradictions. For example, asking what was before God is like asking what is north of the North Pole, a concept that has no meaning within its own framework. Another paradox arises when thinking about causality. Everything in the universe has a cause or reason for being, but if God is the first cause, then He has no cause. This breaks with ordinary logic of cause and effect and forces acceptance that there is an exception to this rule. This exception, while fundamental to theology, challenges the rational mind seeking complete and coherent explanations. The idea of a necessary being who depends on nothing else to exist strains our understanding of how things work. Additionally, the notion of an eternal and immutable God conflicts with the idea of change and movement inherent to time and physical reality. How can God be eternal and also interact with a temporal, changing world? Here arises the tension between absolute deity and dynamic creation. Some theologians suggest God exists in an atemporal state, but may manifest or act within time without being limited by it. This complex idea attempts to resolve the problem of interaction between a timeless God and a universe with a beginning. The concept of infinity also generates paradoxes. A being infinite in power, knowledge, and presence cannot be fully comprehended by a finite mind. This means any human attempt to define or understand God is bound to be limited and partial. Therefore, many spiritual traditions speak of the divine as something undefinable, beyond any mental or linguistic category. This indefinability is both a limitation and an invitation to mystery and humility in the search for truth. These paradoxes have led many philosophical and religious streams to accept that the origin of God is an unfathomable mystery, not because it cannot be thought, but because God's nature transcends human knowledge. Faith, in this sense, becomes an act of trust in what cannot be fully comprehended, and reason becomes a tool that points to those limits and opens the door to the transcendent. Practically speaking, accepting these paradoxes does not mean abandoning the search for meaning, but recognizing there are dimensions of reality that exceed human logic and can be approached through spiritual experience and contemplation. The mystery of God's origin invites us to move out of the comfort zone of rational thought to explore new forms of knowledge that include intuition, revelation, and personal experience. In conclusion, the attempt to understand God's origin confronts us with paradoxes about time, causality, infinity, and the relationship between an eternal being and a temporal world. These tensions are not failures of thought, but signs that we face a profound mystery that challenges our usual logic. Accepting these paradoxes opens us to a broader dimension of reality, where mystery is not an obstacle, but a path toward deeper and more spiritual understanding of the divine origin and its relationship to creation. Do mystical and esoteric teachings exist that reveal something deeper about who God was before creation? Beyond rational philosophy and traditional theology, many spiritual traditions around the world have sought to capture the essence of the divine via direct and symbolic experiences, offering surprising ideas about God's nature before everything existed. Below, we will explore some of those mystical and esoteric perspectives that offer a different, profound vision of God's origin, revealing truths that often defy common logic. In Sufism, a mystical branch of Islam, God is understood not just as a supreme being, but as an absolute and indefinable reality that transcends all manifested existence. For Sufis, God is the origin of everything, and simultaneously a mystery that cannot be fully described or conceptualized in words. Before creation, God is seen as a state of total unity, where no separation exists between creator and creation because there is no duality or multiplicity. This primordial unity is called the unique reality, or al-haq, and it is the source of all existence. In Sufi mystical experience, approaching God involves dissolving the ego and divisions in order to perceive this essential unity that transcends time and space. In Jewish Kabbalah, God's origin is expressed through the concept of Ein Sof, which means endless or infinite. Ein Sof is the divine essence existing before any manifestation, an infinite, boundless state beyond all human comprehension. According to Kabbalah, the creation emerges through a process called Tzimtzum, which involves a withdrawal or contraction of divine light to allow space for the universe. Before this contraction, there was nothing separate from God, only an infinite flow of divine energy and consciousness. Thus, the origin of God in Kabbalah is not an event or a moment in time, but an eternal, undefined state that generates the multiplicity of the world. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss more content like this. That way, you'll always be up to date on our upcoming videos. Now, let's go on. In Hinduism, particularly in the teachings of Vedanta, God, or Brahman, is the supreme, eternal, unlimited reality that transcends all duality and manifestation. Before creation, Brahman is a state of pure consciousness and existence without form or attributes, known as Nirguna Brahman. This state is considered absolute, where there is neither subject nor object, no time nor space. Creation arises as a manifestation, or Laila, divine play, of Brahman, but in essence, Brahman remains immutable and eternal. Hindu mystical schools invite one to meditate on and directly experience this reality, to understand that the divine origin is a state of infinite consciousness and total unity. These mystical and esoteric traditions share something essential. Before creation, there was no separation, no time, no space, only a state of absolute unity and ineffable mystery. This primordial divine reality is beyond all definition and can only be known through direct experience and spiritual intuition, not through intellect or logical reasoning. That is why many of these teachings use symbols, metaphors, and contemplative practices to guide the seeker toward contact with that transcendental dimension. Also, these perspectives invite us to understand that the origin of God is not a point in history or an event located on a temporal line, but an eternal mystery that is always present, beyond the duality of origin and end. The emphasis is on the experience of unity and transcendence, on accepting that divinity is a mystery beyond human comprehension, and that the spiritual path is a gradual opening to that profound truth. In conclusion, mystical and esoteric traditions offer a vision of God's origin that goes beyond reason and enters into the direct experience of divine reality. They speak of a primordial unity without time or space, an infinite, undefinable state that is the source of all existence. These teachings invite us to transcend the limitations of rational thought and to explore the mystery with humility, openness, and spiritual practice. In doing so, the origin of God becomes an invitation to discover not only a beginning, but an eternal presence that dwells at the very heart of reality. What impact does understanding God's origin as an unfathomable mystery have on our lives and spirituality? Beyond philosophical theories and mystical interpretations, this deep reflection on who God was before creation can transform how we see our place in the universe and the meaning of our existence. Now, we'll examine the philosophical and spiritual implications that arise from accepting God's origin as an enigma that transcends our understanding, and how this recognition can open new forms of faith and knowledge. Understanding that God has no origin in human terms invites us to rethink the relationship between divinity and time, space, and causality. Rather than seeking concrete or linear answers, this perspective prompts us to accept mystery as a fundamental part of reality. This acceptance is not resignation or doubt, but openness to the deep, transcendent dimension that sustains everything that exists. By facing the mystery, we cease pretending we can control or fully understand it, and begin experiencing faith rooted in humility and wonder. From a philosophical standpoint, this idea challenges the notion that everything must be explained or reduced to immediate and comprehensible causes. It reminds us that reality may have levels of meaning beyond instrumental reason, that human knowledge has natural limits. Recognizing this helps cultivate an attitude of respect and reverence toward the unknown, enriching both intellectual and spiritual exploration. On the spiritual plane, accepting that God is an eternal mystery without origin can deepen our religious experience. It invites us to live faith not just as a set of beliefs or doctrines, but as a pathway of personal encounter with the divine that transcends words. This approach promotes a more open and dynamic spirituality, where mystery becomes a source of inspiration and transformation rather than a barrier. The experience of mystery can awaken qualities such as patience, humility, surrender, and contemplation. Moreover, this reflection on divine origin connects us with spiritual traditions that value direct and personal experience over mere theoretical explanation. It reminds us that knowledge of the divine can be intuitive and experiential, and that opening to mystery can lead us to higher states of consciousness and deeper understanding of ourselves and the universe. Practically speaking, embracing the mystery of divine origin can influence how we face uncertainties and questions in everyday life. It teaches us to live with ambiguity and trust that there is meaning beyond what we can comprehend. This trust can bring inner peace and a sense of connection with something greater, giving strength and hope in adversity. Finally, this reflection invites respectful, enriching dialogue between reason and faith, between philosophy and spirituality. It shows us that both paths are not opposed, but complementary, and that the mystery of God's origin can be a bridge that unites these dimensions in a shared quest for truth and meaning. In conclusion, accepting that God's origin is an unfathomable mystery has profound implications for our philosophy, spirituality, and daily life. It invites us to embrace mystery with humility and openness, to cultivate a faith nurtured by wonder and experience, and to find in this enigma a source of inspiration that transforms our worldview and our being. Thus, the mystery of God becomes a call to explore, not only the outer universe, but also the depths of our own heart. If this journey into the mystery of God's origin made you reflect and opened new questions, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss more deep content like this. Give it a like if you enjoyed it, and share your opinion in the comments. We want to know what you think about this eternal enigma. Your support motivates us to continue exploring the great mysteries of life and spirituality together. Thank you for joining us on this quest.